Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Just to say, here with everything. I'm really going to try and make something um, of sense of this because I've had to listen to numerous people, and I'm going to try and leave their names off. And this is the third part to the Second Amendment. It is another separate issue, completely over it, everything else. And, um, I mean, in a way, I would say the only reason why there was weak presidents, probably four or six. I know I should look up and have everything perfect here. Before the Civil War of the 1860s, is probably because there were so many of them not in the White House, having to come down and exact situations of the Congress with militia and army in tow that did remove people and deport them on ships back to their own original countries. And since World War II, or else Mussolini reopened colonization to the New World and everything, they, for lack of a better situation, came back in saying it. They went over there and said that they were still USA citizens because they had been here, paid tax, made a tithe to a church in some way or one of the cults, and destroyed certain things, did certain things illegal by the minutes of the Declaration of Law that has been removed. Several of them came over in ways en masse that I'm not really going to try and discuss here. I have a whole separate story and everything else that I'm going to send in Library of Congress for what I lived through and experienced. Again, with no names. This is something that if you hang around with the person for whatever it is, and it's like they'll just bring it up and mention it by the president's name or something else like Polk, Monroe, anything else out there, even Jackson. I mean, it's more than some Native Americans not liking Andrew Jackson, and it has nothing to do with Native Americans. It is something that goes around over the top in every single way out there from it, all the way up to Abraham Lincoln himself. In the simple fact that these people didn't know how or what to properly do with their slaves. I've seen in one story that was a kind of general everything else and just went over the holidays and didn't care how bad it seemed or anything else, and I called it American slavery. It's in the Library of Congress. I can't remember which volume I did it under. It is true to the account of several people that I've met and everything else in a vast conglomerate of the situation. And the presidents would drive down and go into the assembly halls, whatever it is, everything else, and say that this was not allowed because we did not allow human sacrifice unto that. And that was weaponizing religion against the United States in the form of colonization. Well, under the Second Amendment, it shall not be infringed. So this is a domestic, in every way that I can say, domestic versus non-domestic. And if you left here, said that you had participated in the government, were seen to be part of the government, and even represented because you voted for the president, and it's kind of like, I guess, this is going to be really bad too, because, and they would make human sacrifices out of numerous different people. A lot of times Native Americans, for a decade, then they'd do black people for a decade, and then it's kind of like this. Say the president came over and personally, because he's commander in chief, attorney general, and everything else, and arrested you for sex, slavery, prostitution with drugs. Very far cry from slavery, and depending on which state you're in, and everything else, or else just weed, because he does have the right to do that as commander in chief. So you said I voted for him, though. He represents me, so he can't do that to me, because that's something that he should have known through me doing this, that's what I did. It's one of the major arguments that I can say if I go in this one direction from where I live at, they'll bring that up. And if I went in this other direction, it's kind of like more like, well, these were the ones we put out for whatever. So you go and find the white aristocracy, or whatever you want to call it, the United States abolitionist, whatever you want to say, or else just standard whatever government troops, and you sacrifice one of them for it. Then you just, and it's like it's a weird little, where does the dial end up for that 8 to 10 years? And the presidents will come down. There is capital punishment things that are in the sealed sections of the Office of the JAG, and everything else, because last I've heard, I hadn't really kept up with it since I was in my 20s. I think that's the last place they put it at out there for where it would be kept at or found at. And I've worked with these people. They stand around, they turn right around at me, and some of them threaten to actually, whenever things go back, they're going to be doing that to me for reasons from being Oriental to Native American to being old USA, being a lineage of a founding father, to anything else, or else they don't think that there's any more need of power. They did that, and that's how they became Native American or anything else, because they sacrificed them and it was their right, and we went to a civil war, and that's really what basically the Span Am all the way to World War II, and possibly even now with Al-Qaeda, knowing a couple of people in the area and some of the things that have been out there with certain things that, again, would be a major digression from the point. But is it capable under the Second Amendment that if you participated in it and were basically deported from the United States and removed from citizenry, you weren't exiled or anything else, they had a public execution and trial of the men, and the women and children were deported and went back and then sought revenge against the USA, or else bared arms in itself against what it said was against freedom of religion, because some religions will naturally dominate and are naturally set up that way. And you should have known that anyone who accepts christening and baptism from us is on our group that said they would naturally be against us, and that they will be made a human sacrifice of. Is it then that once you're part of the USA, you can never not be part of the USA? And any USA person can go out there, no matter how long, under their lineage, because they've not stood before a federal judge and renounced their citizenship or anything else. There are numerous people that they still come back. They seek amnesty. They fled because the Civil War was so horrible. A lot of them did come back in the 1920s and World War I time. But there are still people that are like that out there, whether they were Unionists, Confederates, or else there's just, this is ridiculous, and they just walked off. They still come back. People still come back from saying, well, this should have been considered a French colony. This should have been considered a German colony, etc., etc. Does the fact that people now say they are justified by the facts that have gone on, they've returned after World War II. Most notably, the ones that I know of are World War II. There are some World War I's that I know of. And the smallest amount of Span Am that have gone on about how they were coming back. And others are like, we're just here on visa. We'll be back. It's not been thoroughly done. We'll have to wait till the third 1985 movie. And it's just a natural situation for them to go on with, and it's part of their living of life. I mean, I've heard everything from stories in New York with homeless killer cults. They go out there and it's like, we've removed everything from this and milked them as far as they can, whether they're black, white, or anything else, and they kill them because they're an old Jew, an old member of the USA. Whether they're using it in the same terminology as that, or else like in certain other languages where Jew means something else different. I mean, it's stuff that I, listen to, keep up with. People are like, so do you go to a goth cult? Or a goth club? And I'm just like, that stuff's never mentioned there. It would never be mentioned in those situations. It'd only be mentioned in the higher end of like Christian society or anything else, or, aristocracial societies, other things, or else just people who really do think they're on top of the world and that they really are God. So, is bearing of arms a capability if those people are removed to come back and say that they reconstructed the United States so that they could then say, you are now in compliance with what we were doing, and everything will be retroactively made unto that? Declaration of law is removed. So you can't use any of those minutes and things before then. And then, depending on how you look at it, do people really have a standing into place if they are not European, African, or a combination of that? Does that mean that this is only going to be a black or white world, and or their descendants of combination? Or is there any way for there to be yellow, if people want to say Orientals are still yellow, red, Southern Native American, brown, if you don't want to say that that's just a natural process of black and white people? Is it now cool that they're here underneath those situations and have came back and said everything has been made in a proper fashion for them, and that they do believe that they are vindicated with the fact that they even had to go raise another army, raise another political system, topple political systems, and say, wasn't the United States doing that in this kind of populist situation where people seem to find Jewish situations, non-human sacrifice, or something else pop culturally sound at the very first parts of the turn of the century? And were you not doing the same thing for about 600, 700 years? Like and subscribe. I'm sure this one's so complex or else stupid that people can't really understand it, or I've lost myself in it. But, um, you know, comment down below and be like, loser. Thank you. Goodbye, folks.